So when the screens are all coated, this is kind of what the screen looks like. When you buy the screen at the store, it's just straight yellow. And then the emulsion is, it's actually like a pinkish color. And then you mix it, it kind of turns more orange. They have green, different colors, but
the stuff at our studio is the orange.
The color really just relates to chemical compound, not as much like to its potency or to which one's better or anything like that. They all work very well. All I'm doing right now is trying to line up my film with the center of the screen. So as I hold it up a little bit, now I wouldn't necessarily want the screen or the image to expose something like this or sideways. So I want everything to be on the screen, easy for me to print. Where the squeegee, everything can hit the image, and I'll get a full print on my piece of paper. This is just a little flat board, sandwich board. Make sure no light goes anywhere else. Whenever I turn the light table on, all the lights will come on, especially the light in here. So we have a lot of sources of light that can actually ruin our exposure. This little sandwich board keeps everything tight and in the system, so that distance heavy.
Nice.
So that everything doesn't jump away. The switch is over here.
Now we're turning on the exposure unit here, the light box. And how long does it sit?
Usually about 6 minutes. On our tables, about 6 minutes. I say usually because it varies depending on the light table.
Yeah. Ours is 2.5 minutes.
Often with educators, printmakers, what students will have to do is the exposure calculator. So we have like this little sheet that you could print, and you would expose it just like you are here, and kind of remove the board at certain times to see how much you would get. And 2:30 is great. You know what I mean? That's quick. It's easy. Ours is 6 minutes because there's like 2 panes of glass between the light and the screen, and then as well this emulsion is kind of resilient. It's got a little bit of heft to it for real. So it's great for outreaches. It's great for our light box. It can last a good while. It doesn't necessarily break down easily with a lot of prints, so we can run editions of 200, 300 without a problem. And the images themselves, so we can keep them in the box for months on end and still get a pretty good burn, even if it gets a little bit of light, all these things. So to figure out really what emulsion works best for your studio. 6 minutes is it's kind of long, but it's not that bad.
It's not that bad.
It's really not bad at all.
Go get a drink.
Yeah.
All right. Full power.
Let's let the top hang off on the board, which is fine. So this part was probably sitting on top of the wood, and I didn't even realize. So I didn't expose right there. Cool. That's okay. So what happens now? In terms of our logistics, I need more tape on that part now. I need more, you know what I mean? Got to tape. So as when we start printing, everywhere that's yellow, the screen is open. So these edges on the side, if I pull my squeegee down and I go a little bit too far, I'm going to hit this and I'll get some blue or some green, some black on my paper. And that might be the end of your print, or you might really get upset, of course, right, that you messed something up. So what we'll do is just put some tape, right, on the sides. Got a little bit of extra exposure on my top here, so I'll just put a piece of tape there too, and we'll be ready to go. Actually, put this in the fan in the dry area. Actually, what's the sun? Cool. That's real.
So we've got the screen ready for printing. We need to mask off the yellow edges, right?
Yes. So basically, we want to, when the screen is done, screen has been exposed, screen is washed out. We've sat it in the sunlight so it can dry. Really, there's like a small evaluation process to say, what do we need to mask off of this screen? Got a very nice burn of John Henry, so there's nothing really extra happening. But sometimes if the screen is old, the emulsion is old, if you get some dust on your screen when you're exposing, you might get little specks of dirt or something, you know, a little spike might come out. In our case, we got a little bit of extra exposure up here at the top, so we got to make sure we cover at least up to the line of where the exposure starts. So we just masking it off. I kind of want to leave that for real, but that's what I was thinking about.
Let's
And
leave
I
it then.
phased out a little bit.
I was like,
I was thinking about, do I want to keep some of
where are
that?
you?
Because I mean, now this is also part of just in the game of planning your process that you are. It's kind of this is the execution part. So you know, a lot of the things that we were experimenting with in terms of the film and the image itself are done. You know, we kind of lost. We had to go back if we wanted to reburn the screen, if we wanted to change anything. Now we have the tool. We're ready to go. And I'm starting to think a little bit more about what colors should I use. Could it be interesting to add some color to my page first? So you know, as we were saying, screen printing, the screen that I'm holding, this is one layer, this is one color. So unless I decide to splash a bunch of colors all on the screen, I'm not going to get anything
It's just
except
gonna
for
be
the
the
one.
color, right.
So thinking a little bit like, well, what do I want for my outcome? Do I want a little bit of green? Do I want a little bit of ink?
We have an example here of one where you collaging before you printed. So having these pieces of paper down and then printing over top of it creates that, add some color, add some interest, even before you begin the actual, before you use the screen.
Okay, so this is a screen by itself. This one right here has been printed with like a light color of brown, with some scrap paper, just for us to test the print, test the screen, make sure that, you know, see if we like what we're getting from the detail, from the exposure.
So adding some life, adding some visual interest to your paper before you begin printing on it can be a fun way
Can
to
definitely be a fun way.
bring more life to a one color print.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And a little, somewhat of a trade, not a trade secret, but a personal thing I like to do sometimes. The oil pastel, since it is oil based, it resists the water. Since we're using water based paint, so if I were to color a section of John Henry with this oil based little stick, this oil based pastel, I can actually relief off that section and put the color back in. So we like to put that in there.
That's a fun little trick.
It is indeed.
So paint, collage, oil pastel, crayon.
All of it. All of it is in there. That's what I mentioned. I used the word mixed media piece for the large one just because it kind of stings me a little bit when people just say, oh, look at that print or look at that. Yeah, because print is often put in this little cubby hole of, you know, machine, production, commercial.
Sure.
And it like it's
Right.
lost sometimes in terms of the conversation of what the worth of the value is, and even the fact that, you know, we just did all that with the washing it and all that is, it's like, well, who cares about that? Or even sometimes it's the same conversation about, you know, a painter who stretches their own canvas,
Yes,
or, you know,
sure.
makes their own frames, and it's not an easy thing to really do. But you know, same thing. I mean, this screen is super small, so it could use a clamp board. It's okay not to have a clamp board. We're just doing a couple prints.
Okay.
It's just, you know, this is kind of a nice way to demonstrate, and even might even do these real quick.
A little flood.
Help us kind of see where John is at. Screen printing could be printed on anything. For this one, I just did 2 passes, 1 flood, 1 pull, or 1 press. You know, you ever want to, however it is chosen to be said in the communities. But for paper, that's really all we need. So we just need 1, you know, nice flood, or 1 nice fill of the screen. Make sure all the sections, all the holes get a little bit of moisture, a little bit of paint, a little bit of ink, and then we can put a little bit more oomph in the next one, a little bit more muscle in it, right? And
So that's what happens with just those 2.
Just those 2. That's just a nice little test. And I chose just throwing the 2 kind of saves me ink because that was just a test print. I don't want to be wasting all my ink with the test there as well. Kind of keeps the screen from getting too messy. The more I print, the more sections are going to start to kind of blacken up or stain essentially, to where it might become a little bit harder for me to do my little funky exposure right here. So right now, just in terms of what's happening, we've got our brown one. And just gonna drop this in. top.
I think so.
A little more tang, alright.
Once, since we, do I need to flood again or just pull?
Just pull.
That's
yeah,
right.
just pull. Hit it with the 2 times.
2 times. Good.
We set this one off just a little bit so that we could see some of the light brown on the bottom of this one. It's got a little swirl and we're gonna drop a print on that too.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, nice.
That little brown underneath actually gave them a nice little skin tone hash, which is cool. And this actually is a kind of talk about bit mapping a little bit. We didn't really mention that.
Yeah.
The screen printing process is whenever we put it through its means, through its production, the image that we use has to be put through its kind of bitmap filter. So it's these little dots that we're seeing, this little hash tone look, even almost like a graphic design, comic booky type vibe.
Yeah.
The bitmapping serves as a way to control detail, control contrast in an image with such high, really such high level of tone and color and really
To
look to
have
it.
value changes. that
Value
are subtle.
changes,
Yeah.
indeed. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The value changes allow for us to get, a differential in his face or his back, his shoulder, you know what I mean? To have certain sections that have a little bit more contrast, a little bit more color in them. And as well, it's all just dots. It's all just one color. So we just ran one color of black through all of here. And sections that have less dots or, dots essentially that are a little bit more space in between them, we're able to see more detail. While the spaces that have more dots or they're closer together, they kind of solidify, solidify the
color.
space
Yeah.
and create a nice dark value for our image. And slide this way. You got the registration on that though?
That's right.
All you? Got that? So, what shot should I paint? I could paint that real quick for real. I wish I had some. No, I don't. Had some spray paint or something? No? Cool.
All right. I think we have it all. Mm-hmm.
See that squeegee real quick?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the one with the swirl? Yeah. I mean, just real subtle stuff like that.
Yeah.
So even this project with John Henry that we have going on is something that, even just the vehicle, the conversation that we had early on about John Henry and the impact he kind of had on me personally growing up. But the story of John Henry got lost somewhere in curriculums or in English and conversations. And I think it is a shame. And when I really brought this work around, I started bringing it to the studio, started working in this larger sense. The conversation was reinvigorated so quickly. Not even just some of the younger kids and the generations, the teens I work with, but even just some of the older folk. My mentors questioning me if I know about John Henry, right? Or like, do you even know what that is? Or you understand like what you're really putting on gallery walls and something. So it was a beautiful, powerful conversation to even sit down and have a conversation with somebody 20 years my senior and just be like, we have this exact same connection with this character, this individual. But this entire project kind of became a nice way for me to educate individuals on my practice, but as well on screen printing. Screen printing, I believe, is a beautiful, accessible means to make art. It's got like this little magic trick type play to it. And
the reveal is so fun.
The reveal is so nice.
Yeah.
So even these guys, John Henry's right here, are from some outreaches I was doing at the Carnegie Libraries. We were going around essentially using these bodies, using these individuals, and having just drop a layer in the brown, a light layer, and then that provides you some guide, some space to work in. So you know that John Henry is here on the paper, or you know that the image itself has a certain space, a certain array on the paper, and then you can color it, you can collage on it, do whatever you need to do, and then we'll bring it back in, screen print that next layer on top of it, and creating some beautiful works, but as well having the conversations that we need to have around these individuals.
So the outreach event was, you know, introducing young people to screen printing, but also connecting that idea that your work, by making art about John Henry, who is important to you, you are able to then have conversations about John Henry and why he's important to you
Absolutely.
with other people. And people who knew about him can tell you more about why he was important to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And people who didn't know now know this new thing, and it becomes part of their identity
Right,
too,
right.
as a result.
It's almost like a beautiful social experiment.
Yeah.
To see and hear the stories that people might have, the connections, or even somebody who has no idea who this is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he still looks
What
like a
do they
slave.
interpret it?
You know,
Yeah.
He still looks, you know, he's a big, bulky black guy with his hammer,
Mhm.
shirts off because he's working or whatever. So, you know, he has certain image aesthetics that are attached to certain things in this
Mhm.
world, you know, whether it's a stereotype thing or it is a fairly controversial look of individuals. And when I was taking these to the classrooms, to the to the libraries, to our outreach spaces, I would often get asked, is that a prisoner? Or is
Mhm.
that somebody working,
Right.
you know what I mean, working on the yard? Or is that
Yeah.
somebody, a few of the images of the students had made, I actually took it to one of the outreaches on the Hill District and decided to just start by making it work. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just talk about screen printing, talk about, you know, how everything works, talk about the engineering,
Mhm.
and then once we kind of get into it a little bit, we'll dig into what we're printing,
Right.
who John Henry is.
Who this is.
And in that little experiment, a lot of the students were making his pants orange.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
As-
Pants orange just because,
Because
you know, the jumpsuits are orange.
jumpsuits
And
are
we
orange
had-
for prisons.
And so
yeah.
when it came time to like kind of talk about our work, talk about our pieces,
Mhm.
it was like, well, I didn't really know what else to. Yeah, I mean, you have this.
How to interpret
We have
it.
this black and white kind of canvas. So you're like, well,
Right.
you're telling me to add color, but I don't really, unless I have the story in mind
Right.
or unless I have that connection, it can be anything.
They made
you know
their
what I
own
mean?
story.
He
yeah.
could also have on some super fly plaid pants or something. you know,
sure.
right? And like,
Could
he
have
just-
been anything.
Yeah, he could just be working on his personal railroad in the back.
And I like that idea. So it's interesting to each person bringing their own set of understandings of the world to this piece. But also that idea that you're collaborating on a work of art is really cool too.
Amen.
That's a great thing that printmaking does, I think, more easily than a lot of other media.
Right.
Yeah.
And it opens up collaboration.
Yeah.
And it allows, even if it is somebody doesn't necessarily want to make the screens. You know, it's kind of where we fall here at
Mhm.
Arts Image Resource, that like, you know, we spend our entire lives, our entire days, 365 days a
Mhm.
year, kind of doing this work.
Yeah.
So, you know, to have a connection with screens and how all this stuff, all the science kind of happens. But if you are an artist who just wants to create, and you
Yeah.
just want to come into the studio and you just like, you have some ideas and you want to execute the ideas.
Right.
Sometimes all the other stuff can get in the way.
Mhm.
And it's like, I don't want to have to
Yeah, someone who's really good at making
I don't
screens.
want to talk about screen, nothing. I don't want to wash anything out. I
Yeah.
don't want to print any films. Can you just, like, you got that
Prep
part,
it. Yeah.
and I'm going to paint, and I'm going to print. I'm going to create the work. It's going to be a beautiful thing.
Mhm.
And that is
That
how
is another
collaboration
way
is
it
born.
happens. Yeah.
Collaboration is one thing. But